Have you ever wondered why some people keep giving chance after chance, forgiving betrayal after betrayal, staying loyal long after they should have walked away, and then one day, without warning, they disappear completely? No explanation, no fight, no revenge, just silence. That silence confuses people because they mistake kindness for weakness. They think an empath will always return. They think compassion has no limit. But what most people never understand is this: empaths do not leave when they are hurt the first time. They leave when something inside them finally dies. And once that emotional death happens, there is no rebuilding it. Because the final line that ends everything for an empath is not anger. It is the moment they realize their love is being used against them. An empath enters relationships with emotional honesty. They listen deeply, forgive deeply, care deeply. They absorb pain like a sponge absorbs water. They become the emotional home for broken people. And in the beginning, this feels beautiful. People feel understood around them, safe around them, seen around them. But over time, toxic people begin feeding on that energy. They learn that the empath will tolerate more than most people. So they push further. They manipulate harder. They lie more comfortably. They disappear and return whenever convenient. And every single time, the empath gives another chance because they believe in healing. They believe people can change. They believe love can repair damage. But while everyone sees the empath as emotionally strong, nobody notices the silent exhaustion growing underneath their smile. Nobody notices the emotional bruises hidden behind their patience. Because empaths are masters at suffering quietly. They carry pain internally while protecting everyone else externally. And this is exactly why their breaking point becomes so dangerous. Because when someone spends years suppressing disappointment, betrayal, disrespect, abandonment, and emotional neglect, eventually something snaps beneath the surface. Not loudly, quietly, psychologically, spiritually, the empath begins waking up. They begin noticing patterns they ignored before. They begin realizing they were not too sensitive. They were simply surrounded by emotionally careless people. And once that realization arrives, everything changes. Suddenly, the empath stops arguing, stops chasing, stops explaining, stops begging to be understood because they finally understand something painful. People who truly care never force you to constantly prove your worth. And this is where the final line appears. The moment an empath realizes their kindness is being exploited instead of valued, a psychological shift occurs. Their nervous system enters survival mode. Their soul becomes tired. Their emotional attachment begins collapsing. This is not impulsive anger. This is accumulated heartbreak finally reaching its limit. And the terrifying part is that most people never see it coming. Because empaths do not announce their final goodbye emotionally. They emotionally detach long before they physically leave. While others think everything is normal, the empath is already grieving internally, already accepting the loss, already preparing to walk away forever. They stop reacting because they no longer believe reactions matter. They stop defending themselves because they realize being misunderstood has become permanent. They stop asking for effort because forced love is not love. And the person who once gave endless empathy suddenly becomes emotionally unreachable, cold, silent, gone. People are shocked by this transformation because they only knew the empath's patience, not their limits. They believed forgiveness meant permanence. But forgiveness is not infinite access. An empath can forgive you and still remove you from their life forever. That is the part many people never understand until it is too late. You see, empaths do not fear loneliness the way others do. What they truly fear is emotional starvation, being surrounded by people who drain them while pretending to love them. So, eventually, they choose peace over attachment, silence over chaos, distance over disrespect. And when they finally reach that stage, there is almost nothing anyone can do to reverse it because the final line is never about one mistake. It is about repeated emotional injuries that slowly destroy trust over time. Trust is sacred to an empath. Once trust dies, the emotional connection dies with it. You can apologize after betrayal, but apologies cannot resurrect emotional safety once it has been shattered too many times. And this is why empaths often disappear suddenly after tolerating pain for years. Outsiders think the breakup happened overnight. In reality, the empath has been emotionally bleeding for a very long time. Every ignored feeling, every manipulation, every broken promise, every moment of emotional neglect was silently recorded inside them. They gave warning signs nobody respected. They communicated needs nobody listened to. They fought for connection while the other person fought for control. And eventually, exhaustion replaced hope. This is the moment the empath becomes dangerous to toxic people, not because they seek revenge, but because they stop caring. And indifference from an empath is terrifying because once they emotionally disconnect, they rarely reconnect the same way again. Their love was never casual. So when it dies completely. The warmth disappears. The emotional access disappears. The loyalty disappears. And suddenly, the people who took them for granted realize too late what they lost. Because genuine empathy is rare. Deep emotional loyalty is rare. Real emotional presence is rare. Most people only recognize the value of an empath after the silence arrives, after the messages stop, after the emotional availability disappears, after the safe place they once depended on no longer exists. And the irony is heartbreaking. The empath spent so much time trying to save others while nobody was saving them. Nobody Nobody asked how exhausted they felt, constantly carrying everyone emotionally. Nobody noticed how lonely they became, always being the healer, but never the healed. This creates a deep psychological wound inside empaths. They begin feeling invisible, used, emotionally consumed, and eventually self-preservation becomes stronger than attachment. That is the final line. The moment survival becomes more important than emotional loyalty. And once an empath chooses themselves for the first time, people call them cold, selfish, distant change, but the truth is they were simply pushed beyond human emotional limits. Even the softest heart becomes guarded after too much betrayal. Even the kindest soul becomes silent after too much disrespect. Pain transforms people, especially people who spent years pretending they were not hurting. And perhaps the saddest part is this: empaths often blame themselves before they leave. They replay conversations endlessly in their minds. They wonder if they expected too much. They wonder if they were too emotional, too caring, too forgiving, too available. But eventually clarity arrives. They realize healthy love never requires emotional self-destruction. Real connection should not feel like emotional survival. Love should not constantly hurt. And once they finally understand this truth, their entire identity begins changing. They stop shrinking themselves to make others comfortable. They stop tolerating emotionally abusive behavior disguised as mistakes. They stop romanticizing potential while ignoring reality. And for the first time in their lives, they begin protecting their own energy the same way they once protected everyone else's emotions. This transformation shocks people because the empath no longer reacts emotionally to manipulators expect. The guilt stops working. The gaslighting stops working. The emotional games stop working because awareness destroys manipulation. And once an empath becomes aware of how deeply they have been emotionally exploited, their compassion becomes selective instead of unconditional. They no longer confuse suffering with love. They no longer mistake attachment for connection. They no longer sacrifice themselves, hoping someone else will finally appreciate them. Instead, they walk away quietly and rebuild themselves privately. And this rebuilding process is painful because empaths feel everything intensely. When they grieve deeply. When they detach, it feels like mourning a death because to an empath, emotional bonds are sacred. They love genuinely. They invested pieces of their soul into people. So when those connections collapse, it changes them permanently. But hidden inside that pain is something powerful: rebirth. The empath who survives betrayal becomes wiser, stronger, more emotionally intelligent. They learn boundaries. They learn discernment. They learn that not everyone deserves unlimited access to their heart. And slowly, they stop apologizing for protecting their peace. They stop feeling guilty for saying no. They stop chasing people who only valued them when they were emotionally useful. This is where true healing begins, not when the empath gets revenge, but when they stop needing validation from people who hurt them. Because the greatest revenge an empath ever achieves is emotional freedom, the ability to sleep peacefully without chaos, the ability to exist without constantly carrying someone else's emotional weight, the ability to love themselves enough to walk away from what destroys them internally. And once an empath reaches that level of self-awareness, they become almost impossible to manipulate again. Their intuition sharpens. Their emotional boundaries strengthen. Their silence becomes sacred. They no longer explain themselves endlessly because they understand a painful truth. People committed to misunderstanding you will never suddenly understand you. So, the empath stops trying, stops proving, stops performing emotional labor for people who only take. And from the outside, this transformation looks cold, but internally, it is survival. It is a soul finally refusing to bleed for people who never appreciated the sacrifice. The final line that ends everything for an empath is not dramatic. It is quiet, invisible, internal. It happens the moment their heart realizes staying is destroying them more than leaving ever could. And once that realization fully settles into their spirit, the relationship is already over, even if nobody else realizes it yet, because when an empath finally walks away, they are not leaving impulsively. They are leaving after fighting for the relationship longer than anyone knows. After crying privately, after overthinking endlessly, after forgiving repeatedly, after hoping desperately. Their departure is not sudden. It is delayed survival. And that is why when an empath finally says, "I'm done," those words carry terrifying finality because they did everything possible before reaching that point. They crossed oceans emotionally for people who would not cross puddles for them. And once they accept that imbalance will never change, their soul finally releases the attachment. Not because they stopped caring, but because caring started destroying them. So, if you ever encounter an empath in your life, understand this carefully. Their kindness is not weakness. Patience is not permission. Their forgiveness is not endless. The strongest people are often the ones who stay gentle in a cruel world. But even gentle souls have limits. Even compassionate hearts eventually break. And when the final line is crossed, the empath does not explode. They disappear quietly, permanently, and the silence they leave behind becomes louder than any argument ever could.